And welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today is another in our series in conjunction with Texas 2036, The Future of Texas, where we talk with the people shaping the decisions that will define Texas between now and 2036. Today, we're talking about something that many Texans are very familiar with, higher education. It's long been accepted that higher education plays an important role in preparing Texans for better paying jobs that are key to family-sustaining incomes. Institutions of higher education, though, are having to adapt to a rapidly changing environment where the skills needed for good jobs are changing in ways that are proving difficult to predict. Also, the increasing cost of university education is leading some Texans to not just doubt whether they can afford a degree, but to question the value of a traditional degree altogether. So, here's the question for today. How is higher education in Texas helping build the future economy, whether through preparing the next generation of highly skilled workers or shepherding the technology breakthroughs that will kickstart the industries of the future? Joining me, Glenn Hegar, Chancellor of the Texas A&M system, who oversees 11 universities and 8 state agencies. Before assuming his current role, he was the state's comptroller for 10 years, serving as Texas's chief financial officer and, in effect, managing the world's 8th largest economy. David Leebron is the president and CEO of Texas 2036, focusing on identifying and advancing data-driven policies that will improve lives and expand opportunities for all Texans. Prior to arriving at Texas 2036, he was president of Rice University for 18 years, and before that, dean of Columbia Law School. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Delighted to be here.
So we have Texas A&M Chancellor, we have former Chancellor of Rice, or former President of Rice University. I went to UT. Are we going to be okay, guys?
We got all things covered so far.
I wore a tie that I thought was
like
pretty
that.
Texas
That's
A&M.
kind of neutral. I like that. I appreciate that.
Neutral?
It has 2 of our university colors. It's got Prairie View and Tarleton State, so I do like it.
This is not neutral. This is 100%.
That's right. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So thank you both for being here. So let's talk about sort of the big picture. Chancellor Hegar, let's talk about A&M for a little bit. How many students attend campuses in the Texas A&M system, and sort of what's that growth trajectory look like?
Yeah, great question. Interesting. If you look at the Texas A&M University system, we're a combination of 12 universities and 8 state agencies, which is a little different when you have agencies that are part of a university system. But if you look at the university side of it, obviously, Texas A&M University is the largest of those 12 here in College Station. With across the 3 campuses here in College Station, McAllen, and Galveston, you have 80,000 students. Then if you go to Tarleton State, for example, in Stephenville, was a regional, kind of like A&M started as a regional. But the fact is we have an HBCU, Prairie View. Most of our campuses are scattered across the state in the regional area, so they're very focused in their backyard, that region of the community. But if you look at all 12 combined, we have roughly 180,000 students that are being educated somewhere across the state in 12 different campuses and regional, local entities, such as with A&M having a campus in McAllen as well as in Galveston.
Yeah. And Mr. Leebron, sort of looking at the broader states, I mean, you were former president of Rice. My brother went to Rice, got his MBA there. I think graduated top of his class. So you did a good job. But what does that look like? How does that compare to the rest of the state universities in Texas, the growth trajectory?
Well, there are different kinds of growth. I think there's a population growth, but there's also a growth kind of in mission and impact across the state. And I think we're really seeing that. We really benefit from multiple really great systems, A&M, UT, Texas State. And you can travel all around the state of Texas, and so many of our communities have important educational institutions, from top research universities to community colleges. And I think that's really what we need to keep in mind, this scope of the mission. And it's a fantastic thing, not only Texas, but across the United States, that there's so many different ways to access this system.
Yeah,
and that's really the promise for us. So I think we've seen with the growth of the population, growth in enrollment at Rice, which of course is much smaller. I presided over, I think it was like a 80 to 90% increase. We were too small and we needed to be larger. But I think, one of the most common words one hears at universities these days is impact, and it has a lot of different aspects to it. Growth is one aspect to it, But I think the real focus needs to be on what's the impact of this university and its campuses.
Yeah. So, I think you both probably have a unique perspective on this, but Texas is growing at such a fantastic rate. Millions more people are expected to move here by 2036. And, that puts a strain on universities in general. But how do universities compete for these students? I mean, it's obviously there's different levels, community colleges versus universities, but how does that competition work? And other than football,
I think one benefit is here in the state, as you said, we are continuing to grow. If you look across the rest of the nation, there's many, especially private universities and very smaller communities across the country that are having significant challenges in closing. So we talk about to somewhat the population cliff, where really it's more of a slope than a cliff, a declining population of a younger demographic in certain parts of the country. Unlike in Texas, it's still growing. And so the point being is, at least for us here in the A&M system, I feel very strongly that we need to continue to add capacity. And adding capacity, I think, for the A&M system is in our regional universities across the state. And again, as I said a word earlier, they're more focused on their backyard, that region of the state, those students that need an education outlet that are not going to be able to afford to be able to pick up and go to a suburban urban area, go to a flagship university. And so they're providing gateways for those individuals to have an economic change in their lives, and not just for them, but for families and for generations. And so I think it is very different from university to university, but also, as I was talking about, the impact. And the impact that different ones are having, whether it's education, whether it's cutting edge technologies, what is the niche of that university. So I think that competition really isn't just competing one for another as in a sporting event, but it's kind of looking at what is that demographic, what is that group, what is that educational need, what is the need for those people, and what is the need for the skill sets and the workforce in that community, but also across the state and the nation.
Yeah.
If I could add to that,
Please.
There are really three different sources of that growth, in my view. One is the population growth, right? We've got a growing population. We expect Texas to be at 35 million people within a few years. We're skewed young, and so we have to deal with that. A second part of that growth is more of our students need to earn post-secondary credentials, and a significant part of those credentials are going to be college and university degrees. And so we have to increase that number. That's only standing now at about, I think it's about 30% of our students are earning post-secondary credentials. And yet the jobs now and in the future are 60% of those jobs. So that's a second source of growth. The third source of growth, which I think we always need to be open to, is Texas is a destination. Right. Just as it's a destination, as we see now for business, it's a destination for students. So attracting, as we grew Rice, one of the reasons we grew was we didn't want to cut back on the number of Texans who were at the university, but we wanted to be a magnet. And I got to the point, I thought maybe sometimes we needed to warn parents who thought, from California and the Northeast, who thought, it's okay if their children go to Rice because they're not going to stay in Texas. Well, guess what? They do stay in Texas. They get here and they see the opportunity and they like living here. So I think we need to keep in mind those three sources of growth.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, so I think, each university sort of has their, growing up, Texas A&M, I sort of learned that Texas A&M was, rural medicine, veterinary care, agriculture, that sort of thing. And it's really expanded, I think, a lot into, I think you guys do semiconductors, robotics, AI-driven industries, that sort of thing. How did that growth occur? Why? I mean, I assume you guys still do all the
above still.
All the
yes,
original.
we do. Yeah, of course. If you look, Texas A&M University, agriculture, mechanics, engineering per se. So those are kind of two of the cornerstones. But we have a remarkable business school, remarkable sciences programs within engineering, within agriculture. If you look at subsets, as you talked about, whether we just broke ground here recently on the Texas A&M Semiconductor Institute, we are breaking ground on new agriculture facilities, or if you go across the system in different pockets. If you go to Corpus Christi, for example, whether it's marine biology or ends up being in drones, has a significant program in drone capacity and where we're going as a country, not just national defense, but for civilian use. And so I'm just talking about a couple things off the top. A&M plays a large role in space, as space is becoming a significant frontier as where this country is going into the future, and obviously competition internationally. So we can kind of drop down within the big subparts of smaller parts. Nuclear, as we'll talk about maybe later, is a substantial need for the country, because if you look through the dawn of time, there has been energy equates to economic opportunities.
Yeah.
And this country has to have, like the world, significant more footprint in energy, and that can be a much more capable component today with technology than it ever has been before. And so there's a lot of different pieces, but I think one thing that's really important, and I just want to preface this, I emphasize not just cooperation among our members in the system, but also with other universities. A&M and Rice working, I'm talking about space is one front right there alone, or bringing in the University of Texas system. And so the three are working together, and others, we're working with Texas Tech on a variety of things, working with the University of Houston, working with Texas State system. So I think we kind of have to make sure it's important to talk about the collaboration within the universities and how ingrained that is, because each one has different skill sets that are really important to make a significant game-changing breakthrough in impactful research.
Yeah. So in the Texas A&M University, you guys still have all of the original stuff, the original focuses that you'll have, but obviously, as you explained, there's a lot of expansion happening. Does that sort of happen in a silo, or are they working together? Are students learning, I don't know, how to utilize AI in agriculture, for instance?
I think the big difficult challenge for any large organization is to ensure that collaboration and working together. And so, in other words, it starts out with an idea or a researcher that's getting a grant in a specific area with collaboration with others, but how do we make sure we're looking, and I'm emphasizing this in my first 10 months, across the system? What are we working on that's in AI? Where are the pockets, and how do we bring those pieces together and collaborate together more than we have before? And I think it's imperative for us at a system level to ensure that we are providing opportunities for people to recognize where that collaboration can be. So I think that's more important than ever if we're going to make the next step in game-changing impacts.
Yeah, innovation comes from thinking outside the box, and it's often your box. And if you look at the great advances in science, for example, it's sort of often putting two things together that people didn't necessarily think related to each other, and you get the insights from one. And it's not even just science. I actually studied the history of science as an undergraduate, and even the role of art and how images in art inform the development and concepts in science and the structures in chemistry, for example. So I do think sort of eliminating both those kind of barriers that can be very strong actually internally at universities, and universities kind of put actually a fair amount of effort into how do we build these interdisciplinary connections across our campus. And I think industry is also interested in that. They want kind of very different perspectives on how do you solve problems, basically.
So I want to ask, there's obviously public and private universities. Explain sort of the difference in how well they're able to, meet these demands of the student needs and the state needs. Is there a difference between the public and the private? Are private, typically people think of private institutions being able to pivot more quickly, sort of thing, but does it sound like that's necessarily the case in the education system?
Well, we've really seen here in Texas the development of fantastic public universities.
Oh, of course. No doubt.
You look at A&M, UT, and those are both members of what's called the Association of American Universities, the very top tier of research universities. I think actually when I look at it today, I think at one point we might have said those institutions are slower in a way. I'm not seeing that looking out today. When I look at the development of A&M in particular of the past few decades, it's become a fully competitive top tier research university, and you just can't sit still in that environment. I do think, as Glenn mentioned, this issue of scale is very important for a number of reasons. And so, at Rice, we found the public universities very good relationships with us. For the elite private universities, that selectivity is part of their identity. In many ways, I think the advantage of having a large system, I haven't run one, is you have so many different kinds of universities, as you said earlier, serving different parts of that community. All across the state, people are ready for different levels of institution. I think that's really one of the very key things about having a very robust public university system. Now, it also takes place in the private system. There are a lot of private colleges and universities across the state. I think they pose two challenges. One is the financial cost of many of them, and the other is the size of many of them. So if you said, different states, look different. On the Northeast, what you see is a kind of almost predominance of private universities.
Yeah.
But here in the states that really got launched with the land-grant universities, in size easily, it's the public universities that are providing the bulk of the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would just add this. I do think regardless of which one you're in, leadership matters.
Sure.
Leadership matters of bringing people together, creating a vision, and having a can-do attitude. And so, most issues in life are complex and complicated, and leadership makes a difference in trying to solve that. And I think trying to think out of the box, how do you find solutions? And so I would say I think it's unique in each situation, but leadership matters.
And competition's not a bad thing.
Right.
Of course. You just want that kind of combination of the ability to collaborate, where you bring people on different campuses together around common projects. And that occurs really at the professorial level often.
Yeah.
But we're driven to really be the very best that we can be, to be the place where the most impactful discoveries are made. And Texas has a complex enough ecosystem of higher education to sustain that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the affordability of a college education, a university education. I think a lot of people talk about and hear about and experience sort of the higher education affordability. I think I could call it a crisis in many ways. What is A&M doing to address that? And is there anything that other universities in Texas, or private or public, that could learn from that?
Yeah, so for one, we have kept tuition at a same level for years now. And so in other words, not having tuition increases is one. Just the other day, I was giving a speech here in College Station to the 50 reunion class and talking about the difference between now and 1976. Obviously, costs are different, but a couple of statistics. One, the retention rate is over 90%, almost 95%, and then 63% of the students in College Station graduate debt-free. Now, of the remaining percentage, a significant portion of that is very limited debt. So trying to make sure you keep tuition fees lower. You try to make sure that you are giving economic opportunities to students and leveraging opportunities for students. I talk in my bio how I didn't go to a four-year institution my first year. I went to community college.
Yeah.
And so leveraging, and I talk about that because I think that's an important. I mean, half of our students in the state of Texas are educated in the community college level. And so therefore the different pathways for different people, I think, is an important component to talk about, that affordability. And at least in our system, I think a key beneficiary, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, is with our regional universities. Those students can live and work in home and go to school, and that affordability of attaining a regional member university degree can have a generational impact. And so that affordability is having that network across the state.
And we put in, now 8 years ago at Rice, something we call the Rice Investment, and was really designed not only to make it affordable, but to make it easy for a 17-year-old to explain to his or her parents why they could afford to go to Rice. And very simply, if your family earned less than $75,000 or less, you had no tuition, no room, no board. That was all free.
Yeah.
And if it was less than $140,000, you had at least zero tuition and probably some more. And then I think it was under $200,000, at least half tuition, between $140 and $200. And those programs are getting more aggressive. Rice was at that time a leader in not just the magnitude of the support, but again, the simple structure of the support. Because one of the problems that universities really had was it was so opaque. It was, you sort of applied for financial aid and you had to guess what the results are going to be.
Yeah.
That was not a good system for explaining, as I said, to your parents why you could afford to go to Rice. So we've seen in private universities, and not all of them can afford it, really making it affordable for not just lower income students, but middle income students as well.
And that's critical for the first generation students, especially more than anybody else, to be able to, as you say, explain that to their parents, because that's the first gen students.
So, I think that you both you're talking about what A&M does, and you talked about sort of what Rice did as a private university. And I mean, both sound like they're effective in different ways, but I'm wondering if there's anything that state policymakers should be looking at going forward over the next 10 years, leading up to the bicentennial in 2036. Is there anything that they can do to help address that? And I don't to either one of you.
As a former legislator, I'd say number one, always ensure flexibility.
Sure.
Because when you eliminate flexibility, you don't enable each institution to have the various levers they may have for local. But I think also continuing to invest in higher education. I mean, the fact is, as was talking about earlier, we have to have more education in cutting edge skills and trades if Texas is going to continue to grow. We're growing as a state. I mean, in my old role, I used to brag a lot, as a good Texan does, that in 10 years we moved from the 12th largest economy to the 8th. And in one component, I remember when it was a presidential election and all the manufacturing has gone overseas and it's not here in the country. Well, in fact, yes, manufacturing had left, but in part, the state of Texas had continued to increase in manufacturing in high GDP output in high cutting edge technologies. And so therefore, it may not be the same number of workers at a semiconductor plant, but guess what? Those jobs are well paying.
Yeah.
And so to come back to, you need the higher degrees for that workforce. And that is economic opportunities in a community, because it's higher paying jobs in a community than otherwise. And we need to continue to keep that balance, in my opinion.
I think there are a number of things the state can do. One program that I think was terrifically successful and helpful was the CPRIT program, the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. And that was recently followed up by DPRIT for dementia, which sounds narrow, but it's not. These things really spin off. They discover new knowledge. I've always been inspired by President Kennedy's speech at Rice Stadium in 1962 about going to the moon. And one of the things he said, when you have this kind of exploration, you have these unexpected things that come out to it. We got to the moon, but the spin out in technology for Earth was really phenomenal out of the space program. And that's what we see. So I hope the legislature will continue to think about what the next CPRIT or DPRIT is, because it's really an investment that has a huge payoff.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a point to say, we have these many different parts of our system, but it's not just what higher education does. It really starts at K through 12 and actually starts before that with what's the appropriate role of the state in childcare, for example. That's a part of the educational system in many ways. And it's a fragile system in the sense, if you're not doing math and reading at grade level in third grade or eighth grade, then your chances of getting to the right place in the system as you move forward are much less. So I think what the legislature has been active in, and we at Texas 2036 have been a key force in, is how do we make all these systems more productive? There's this chasm that exists between graduating from high school, for example, and going to college, really getting that post-secondary degree. And that's been a lot of focus. And having, for example, the community colleges reach back, in effect, into the high schools and provide some of those credentials to high school students, those kind of programs really change the percentage of our students who are going to end up in higher education. And it's that pathway, the kind of pathway that Glenn took, or my predecessor as president at Rice, also started a community college. There are very few places in the world where that's possible to do. And if we can get all parts of that system working well, I do want to echo something the Chancellor said about also encouraging independence. We want to hold folks accountable. We want to encourage them to have credentials of value that pay off. But these institutions really do require a certain amount of independence to achieve their full potential.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up space, right? Talking about the moon and all. I think it's, space is great. It's really interesting. A lot of great things in space are happening right now. And I think a lot of great stuff in space is happening right now at Texas A&M. I believe that the Texas A&M Space Institute, 400,000 square feet, contains the world's largest indoor moonscape and Marscape. I'm not sure why we're not interviewing there. I don't know why we're doing it. That sounds awesome.
It's still under construction. That's why. So we'll go there after construction.
We wouldn't.
Finished.
No one would have known. No one knows what Mars looks like.
You wouldn't hear it beep beep, boom boom boom. Construction. We'd have to be in a soundproof room, but it would be a cool sight to see right now.
So the next interview we'll do it there. So how did A&M pull this off? Again, growing up, A&M, agriculture, stuff like that, now space and everything else that you've talked about. I think it's pretty amazing. So why is that important? The space exploration, just talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so a couple different reasons. One, Texas A&M University has good programs in that area. We have several former astronauts. We have several people that have worked at JSC over the years, worked in NASA over the years, that are part of faculty. Part of this is also thanks to Dr. Greg Bonin, who is from that area and has a big interest in space and in that community. Johnson Space Center, as we are looking at in Texas, what is kind of the new frontier of outer space? Now, obviously, it is very different with the federal government than what it was in the 1960s, because now we have a lot of private companies that are more focused on low orbit, where the federal government is looking out into the future and to further. We just had the Artemis 2 successful launch and coming back to Earth, as in going around the moon, first time in decades that has occurred. So this was part of a vision that started here at Texas A&M University, also in conjunction with Johnson Space Center. Also, that we're fortunate to have somebody that has a significant interest in this area with Representative Bonin, who's an A&M graduate and down in that community, and really gets the vision that Texas as a state for the next generation can be a significant player, not just in opportunities among our universities, our anchor that is Johnson Space Center, our private companies that are here and continuing to build both in domestic flight and space, the whole aerospace industry. And so I see it as an opportunity for Texas that right now we're really at the opportunity to continue to build in this area that can literally have a generational impact of opportunities and economic opportunities and development in technologies.
This is a fantastic opportunity for our state. And I think it's something that's radically changed in the last 5 to 10 years with the location or relocation of SpaceX, for example, with what we're now seeing as the economic potential. For example, there's a company in Houston that's looking at mining helium-3 from the moon. That now is a realistic economic possibility. It wouldn't have been that 10 years ago. And so this is an area where Texas has a base that's stronger than almost any other state. Of course, an unbelievable history in that area, going back to the first space program. But what we're going to see is a lot of new industries come out of that. And so we have potential with what you've done already at A&M, with some of the historic stuff, which is at Rice, which is a little bit different, which what is going on down in the Rio Grande Valley. It's an incredible opportunity for the future.
And this is an area that, at least right now, we're leaning into very heavily as a system, and for me, and a few projects that I'm working on that hopefully we can land, no pun intended, but maybe I did as well. And so if we can, I think they can truly be game changers, but part of it, not just for the A&M system, not just for the state of Texas and the nation, but also in collaboration with our sister universities across the state. I think it can really position Texas.
I mean, I can't help but wonder how attractive that is to incoming students to have a space program just on the university. Even if I'm coming to A&M just to do, I don't know, accounting, and that's what I'm good at and everything like that. But it just sounds cool that there's a space program.
But it also ties back into many other industries.
Sure.
And I'll make the point of example. I grew up just northwest of Houston, 6th-generation Texan. My family still has our family farm. And as a kid several years ago, when you first have technologies and equipment in farming that is GPS coordinated, well, those are satellites that are up in space. And so the point is, whether we use it in we're driving. Every time I get in a car, guess what I do? I don't pull out an old map anymore. I just hit my app, and it tells me how fast when I'm getting there, the interactive. And so all of those you're tying back several industries back to our daily lives.
And anecdotes aren't quite data, but a nephew of mine came to Rice, studied engineering there, is now working for NASA.
Yeah.
Know another guy who's a writer in New York City. His son came to Rice and now is working for NASA. So this is an attraction for our state. It's exactly as you say. This is exciting, and exciting not just as exploration, but exciting because of this sort of intellectual advances that are going to come out of the space program, and people want to be part of that.
So, Chancellor Hegar, A&M is building I think it's a $226 million semiconductor institute, world-class clean rooms, R&D labs, and it seems like it's really anchoring the state's sort of research and workforce pipeline into that industry. I live in Austin, grew up in Austin. I think that Samsung is building or has built in Taylor a semiconductor plant there. I don't know where it is right now, like in the process.
Still in production.
Still in production.
Still being built.
Well, so it goes. So how does this cement Texas as a leader, a global leader in semiconductors?
Yeah, first, this is a significant investment by the university and by the state of Texas, because for our system, not only this is actually the most expensive per square footage building that we've ever built in A&M history, but it's not significant because of the cost. It's significant because of the impact that it can have on the state. And as we continue to develop and build chip technology, obviously chips are in everything that we almost touch in our daily lives. It's in every almost workforce, in our personal lives. And so from a national security perspective, making sure that we have higher end technologies being built in this country versus dependent on others. The global supply chains are important, but being able to have that sourced here in Texas and having the expansion under the federal policies and state policies of more chip production in this country and in this state, both the nation and state have moved in that direction, and this is one component. And so this is given the ability to where we can work with large companies, but also smaller companies that need space, need opportunities to develop their products, and this is a site where they can develop it, and we can also actually produce those products on site and to continue in R&D testing, but also production.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, Mr. Leebron, talking about space, semiconductors, things like that. A lot of people with SpaceX particularly, and for the space part of it, but they think of it as a sort of a private industry sort of thing. And as we're discussing here today, that's not so clear cut, right? And how do those two work together? The private industry and the public universities or private universities. How do those two work together? Obviously, I don't think private industry can do it all.
I don't think so. And the history here is really very interesting. I don't want to take too much of your time on this, but if you go back to the founding of the first sort of universities in the Middle Ages, almost the whole idea was these were sort of set off and separate, and you sort of went into a kind of isolated community in a way. And really until somewhat recently, that there was a pretty good separation between universities and industry. And that really started changing pretty radically, I would say, after World War II, but that's accelerated in recent years. And it's really because industry had some fundamental research labs, like Bell Labs, that was closed. Industry can't do that all. Part of it is because it's too uncertain in terms of what the return on investment is. We see over time the return on investment in fundamental research, that is research which is aimed at just understanding this world around us. It has a huge return, but it's not something you can sort of communicate to your shareholders. maybe. And then you have this incredible talent that's attracted to universities. And those folks now actually want to be part of application. And we don't want to go too far in that. We don't want to turn our universities into arms of industry. But what we're seeing is this incredible collaboration and building of ecosystems. You mentioned it here at A&M, at Rice University. We have a number of ways that we did that. We built something which we call the ION in Midtown Houston in an old Sears building. That's a place where both the university and industry and startups come together. And I look at it a little bit as two somewhat different things. It's the relationship with established industry, which is seeking what's the next thing? What do we really need to understand even better than we're understanding? Where are the next advances coming from? And then there's the whole startup ecosystem. And that's what universities, and we saw that in Silicon Valley. And so we're now seeing that across Texas, which is becoming a great innovation and startup state, because we're seeing the participation of both the universities and the sort of startup venture capital aspects really come together, not kind of erode the fundamental purposes of these institutions, but really make possible new industries, new discoveries. When there's innovation, industry is going to flock to the location that there is talent and discovery. If there's not innovation, they're just going to go to where the wages are lowest. And so this is a really important part of the future of Texas, in my view.
There's a ton that we could be talking about with education and the future of education and A&M and Rice and all the different universities. But you know, we're coming up pretty close to the end here. So just real briefly, Chancellor Hegar, I want to talk about nuclear. The energy proving ground at Rellis, I think I drove by it on the way in. It's sort of an audacious bet on nuclear energy. Yeah. Explain what that is and sort of how that may affect the future of Texas's energy, overall picture.
Yeah, if you look at the state of Texas, obviously we are recognized as a global energy leader, and not just in obviously oil and gas when people think of Texas, but also in renewables as well, whether it's in solar and or wind. But another component that we have got to figure out how we're going to have the energy gap, whether it's AI, space exploration, all these different components, we don't have enough energy to be able to accomplish the next changes in technology capabilities. And so therefore, it seems that nuclear can play a role with technological capabilities. And this administration has put a large emphasis on small modular nuclear capabilities for that, whether again in AI, data centers, all this production that we have to have. And so at least here at the system, and my approach and my board of regents, we are taking a very methodical, one step at a time with each company that we're looking at the Rellis campus. But what I would like to see out at Rellis, and we are putting a potentially big bet in this area, of a cluster of companies in both fission and fusion. And so I think it's really important, as we were talking about just a minute ago, whether it is meeting the technological needs in the workforce in partnerships with industries, whether it's already set companies or it's the new startups. And so I think you have to have a cluster where it is the competition, but it's also each are thriving off each other's technology and pushing each other, that competition higher. And so what I see at Rellis, a big part of it is an applied research campus where we test, we break, we figure out how to do it better. But in the nuclear space, I think it's an area where we bring companies together and we can hopefully help solve part of that energy needs that this country has.
Yeah. So sort of final round of questions here. I think it's probably appropriate to ask. I'm not going to ask you because I think I know your answer already, but who's going to win the football national championship first, UT or A&M?
I think we're going to find ourselves back in 1970 and Rice is going to beat UT and emerge as a surprise.
I knew he was going to go with that answer. I knew the bet was Rice. That was the good answer today. He was going to say over there.
Well, I'm a UT grad, and whatever. If it's A&M or UT, at least it's a Texas team.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Okay, fair enough. So, Mr. Leebron, zooming out to Texas to 2036, how do I as a Texan know if we're fulfilling the higher education goals for students and for the states in 2036? How do I know that we've been successful?
Well, we at Texas 2036, we say we are data-driven. We also emphasize accountability, and that's one of the things we've really sought in the legislation that's been adopted in recent sessions. And so we can look at not just what percent are graduating, because from high school, for example, Texas has done really well at that, but are they reading and doing math at grade level? Because that's the foundation of the future. That's the pool that extraordinary universities like Texas A&M really need to draw upon. Are they then earning those secondary degrees? Are they college, career, and military ready, which is the standard that we are using? Are their incomes afterwards reflecting the value of those credentials? And, one of the questions that gets asked is this still worth it? Is it worth going to higher education? Well, just look at the data. Nationally, it's a 60% increase, roughly speaking, in income if you get a degree, a higher education degree. In Texas, it's closer to 80%. So it's really worthwhile, but I think we have to continue to look at the data. The challenge, briefly, for higher education, especially our kinds of institutions, is we really have a couple different missions. On the one hand, we are training people for the workforce, and we're very focused on that at Texas 2036. But 60% of Texans say that a central goal of higher education is this broadening, in some sense, of the human spirit, educating people for society. And we really ought not leave that behind. We're focused today on the practical consequences, but what we achieve in our universities is actually much broader than that.
Yeah. And Chancellor Hegar, if we're sitting here in 2036, what does the A&M system of the future look like? Are there any important decisions that the system needs to make in the next, say, 2 to 3 years to make sure that you guys are on track for that bicentennial?
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about for me that is a real priority is unlocking the real potential of this system, and that's the partnerships across this system in our 12 universities and our 8 agencies, and in forging those connections and those opportunities across is extremely important. I think that we're going to continue to grow our regional members to make sure that we're providing those economic opportunities to those students in those areas. Some of those regional members will then become destination universities, just like the one that we're right here across from. I mean, this was a regional university that is now a destination university that's impacting the state and the nation. And so those growths will occur, but also the strategic decisions of which industries and what areas are we going to lean into heavily that will make that generational impact, not just in the workforce, the education degrees, but the economic opportunities of industries. Those are the decisions we're making literally right now. And it's pretty amazing how many of those are coming front and center into this office in just the first 10 months that I've been here. It's pretty phenomenal. Texas has grown significantly in the last 10 to 20 years. And the economic opportunity of this state to grow, to move from the 8th largest economy in the world to number 7 is coming really fast. But I would also like to key on some of the last things just said. It's not just about the education that student's having, but it's making sure that we're developing men and women that have leadership capabilities and the foundation bedrock of character to be true impacts in their families, their communities, the state, and the nation. And that part cannot be underestimated.
Absolutely. Well, Chancellor Hegar, I appreciate you taking time. David Leebron, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. It was a real pleasure. Thank you both. Texas is home to 16 top-tier or R1 research universities, more than any other state. The face of higher education is changing, though. We have to think carefully about how higher education is preparing students to enter the workforce ready to thrive. And if we need to make changes, the time to start those efforts is now. That is the kind of long-term challenges Texas 2036 is focused on as we approach the state's bicentennial. I want to thank our guests today and encourage you to learn more at texas2036.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.